As the Haggadah today interprets the first of the four verses from the book of Devarim, which serve as the core of the Haggadah, we discuss the Jewish people's early days in Egypt. And one of the things that the Haggadah stresses is that Bnei Israel were a recognizable group within Egypt, that they were Mitsuyanim Sham. They were outstanding, they were noticeable there. So the question is, what does Mitsuyanim Sham mean? So a number of the Rishonim say that Mitsuyanim alludes to the idea that the Jewish people were, in fact, a clearly identifiable ethnic, cultural group in Egypt. They lived distinctly, they dressed distinctly, and everyone knew exactly who they were. This is the famous comment attributed to the Midrash that the Jews in Egypt kept their clothing, they kept their language, they kept their names, that certain cultural markers that linked them together were consistent throughout their time in Egypt. The Ritva, though, takes this in a slightly different direction and suggests that an example of Mitsuyanim would be the Jews in Egypt were tzitzis, which again is on the surface somewhat anachronistic kind of comment, given that the reason for tzitzis, according to the Torah, is that tzitzis reminds us of the Exodus from Egypt, right? Rather than something that we would have worn when we were in Egypt itself. Whether or not the Ritva meant this literally, and again, there is a tradition that the Avos, the patriarchs, were privy to all of the mitzvos of the Torah. I think that perhaps what we see here is a question of grappling with what exactly the identity of the Jewish people in Egypt was. Was it merely an ethnic cohesion? In other words, there were certain kinds of external markers that kept the Jewish people together, cultural relics of language and nomenclature and things like that, which are important and help preserve the identity of the Jewish people, but at the core of which were empty. Or, as the Ritva would have us understand, that the nature of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim had an essence to it as well. That what was preserved, at least at the beginning of the period of our sojourn in Egypt, were those traditions received from the patriarchs and matriarchs, and that those were kept alive even during the time of Egyptian bondage. And again, this is an interesting question that we seem to have midrashim that point in different directions, right? Some that emphasize the merits of our ancestors in Egypt, the idea that they did indeed preserve things. Again, the image that the Midrash Rabbah preserves of scrolls of traditions the Jews would pore over on Shabbos, even in Egypt, that kept up their spirits even during the depths of slavery. And other sources which suggest that there was a strong degree of assimilation. Now again, there are a number of different ways of approaching these different sources. One could see them as describing different stages within the slavery, different groups within the slavery, but I think that as part of our process on the night of the Seder, of trying to really put ourselves in the shoes of our ancestors in Egypt, reflecting on this question of what did it mean to be a Jew in Egypt, I think really is an important one, and part of the process of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, of halachically telling the story of the Exodus.